The wilted roses had been rotting in her basket for 3 days, and Clara Dawson knew if she didn't sell them tonight, she wouldn't eat tomorrow. She stood outside the iron gates as dusk settled over the city, the towering mansion beyond them barely visible through the fog that rolled in from somewhere she couldn't identify. This part of town had always unsettled her, the streets too quiet, the buildings too old, the air too cold even in summer. But the mansion's mysterious owner bought flowers every week without fail, and Clara needed the money more than she needed comfort. Her fingers trembled as she arranged the drooping blooms, trying to make them look less pathetic. The petals had gone soft, their edges brown, their fragrance sour. She'd bought them cheap from the market's closing stalls, hoping to mark them up enough to cover her rent. 3 months ago, she'd had a steady job at a cafe downtown. Then her mother got sick. Then the medical bills came. Then everything fell apart so quickly Clara barely remembered what stability felt like. The intercom beside the gate crackled to life, making her jump. "The usual?" a voice asked, not the buyer himself, but his assistant, a woman who always sounded vaguely amused. "Yes," Clara called out, her voice catching in the cold air. "I have roses tonight. Fresh, relatively fresh." A pause. Then the gate clicked open. Clara blinked in surprise. In 6 months of selling flowers here, she'd never been invited inside. The assistant always came to the gate, paid in crisp bills, and disappeared back into the fog. But now the wrought iron swung wide, revealing a stone pathway lit by lanterns that seemed to burn with pale blue fire. "Come to the door," the intercom instructed. "He wants to see you himself." Every instinct screamed at Clara to run. She'd heard the stories about this neighborhood, whispered by other street vendors and shop owners who quickly closed up before nightfall. People went missing here. The residents were strange, reclusive, powerful in ways that didn't make sense. But Clara looked down at her basket of dying flowers, thought of the eviction notice tucked in her coat pocket, and walked through the gates. The pathway seemed longer than it should be, winding through gardens where nothing grew. The lanterns cast strange shadows that moved against the wind. Clara hugged her basket tighter, her breath coming out in visible puffs despite it being July. The mansion loomed ahead, all Gothic architecture and dark windows, looking like it belonged in a different century entirely. The front door opened before she reached it. A woman stood in the entrance, tall and elegant, with silver hair pulled into an intricate braid. Her skin was so pale it almost glowed in the darkness, and her eyes held an unnatural gleam. She wore modern clothes, a sleek black dress that probably cost more than Clara's annual rent, but something about her felt ancient. "Clara Dawson," the woman said, not as a question. "He's been curious about you." "I just sell flowers," Clara managed, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "Yes, wilting ones. Week after week, you bring dying things to our gates, and week after week, we buy them." The woman stepped aside, gesturing into the mansion's depths. "He wants to know why." Clara didn't move. "I don't understand." "Neither does he. Come inside." The warmth hit her first unexpected after the unnatural cold outside. The entrance hall stretched impossibly high, with a chandelier that dripped crystals like frozen tears. Everything was pristine, expensive, untouched by the decay that marked Clara's world. Marble floors reflected her worn sneakers and patched coat. She felt like a stain on a perfect canvas. "Wait here," the silver-haired woman instructed, then vanished into the shadows so quickly Clara wondered if she'd imagined her. She stood alone in the entrance hall, clutching her basket, listening to the silence. No sounds of life, no footsteps, no voices, no music, just emptiness that felt deliberate, curated. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should leave. She should run back through those gates and never return, find another buyer, another way to survive. "You're afraid." The voice came from behind her, smooth and dark as midnight water. Clara spun around, nearly dropping her basket. He stood at the base of a grand staircase she could have sworn wasn't there a moment ago. Tall, impossibly tall, with white hair that fell past his shoulders and skin like marble. His features were sharp, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made Clara's breath catch. He wore all black, immaculately tailored, his presence filling the entire hall without him moving at all. "I'm sorry," Clara stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude. Your assistant said—" "I know what she said." He moved down the stairs with inhuman grace, each step silent. I asked her to bring you inside. I wanted to see the girl who sells death at my gates. Clara's grip tightened on her basket. They're just flowers. Dying flowers. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see his eyes weren't quite human, too bright, too knowing, too old. For 6 months, you've brought me wilting roses, browning lilies, decaying carnations, never fresh, always on the edge of rot. Why? Heat rushed to Clara's face. I buy what I can afford. I thought maybe you didn't notice or didn't care. You always paid, so You thought I was foolish enough not to see. His lips curved, not quite approval. I see everything, Clara Dawson. I see you standing outside my gates in worn shoes, counting coins with frozen fingers. I see you trying to make dead things beautiful. I see you desperate. Shame burned through her chest. Then why did you keep buying them? He tilted his head, studying her with unsettling focus. Because desperation interests me. Because you never stop trying, even when any rational person would have given up. Because something in you refuses to surrender, and I find that compelling. Clara didn't know what to say to that. This man, this strange, beautiful, terrifying man, was talking to her like she mattered, like her pathetic survival tactics were worth his attention. It made no sense. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. His eyes flashed with something that might have been amusement. "You don't know? Should I? Everyone in the city knows my name, whether they admit it or not." He moved closer, and Clara caught a scent like winter frost in old books. "I am Fenrir Nox. This is my territory. These are my streets. And you, little flower seller, have been standing outside my home for half a year without knowing you were courting death itself." The name hit her like ice water. Nox. She'd heard it whispered in the parts of the city where people locked their doors before sunset, in the stories mothers told to keep children from wandering. The Nox family ruled the underworld, not criminals, not exactly, but something older and darker, something that predated the city itself. "You're," Clara's voice died in her throat. "A vampire," Fenrir finished, his voice carrying no shame, only pride. "The vampire king of this region, to be precise. Did you truly not suspect?" Clara's legs felt weak. Every instinct screamed at her to run again, but his gaze held her pinned like a butterfly on display. "I thought those were just stories." "Stories exist because truth is too frightening to speak plainly." He reached out, plucking a dying rose from her basket. It disintegrated at his touch, petals falling like ash. "I could kill you for trespassing. It would be within my rights. My kind don't welcome human intrusion." "Then why haven't you?" Clara demanded, fear sharpening into something defiant. If she was going to die, she'd do it with her spine straight. Fenrir's expression shifted, approval flickering across his features. There it is, that spark, that refusal to break. He let the rose petals scatter across the marble floor. "I haven't killed you because you interest me, Clara Dawson. You're drowning in a world that doesn't care about you, yet you keep standing at my gates with your dying flowers, trying to survive. That takes a particular kind of courage, or madness." "I'm not courageous," Clara said quietly. "I'm just out of options." Often the same thing. Fenrir gestured toward a doorway that led deeper into the mansion. "Come, I want to show you something." "Why would I follow you anywhere?" "Because you have nothing to lose, and I'm offering you something you desperately need." He looked at her with those ancient burning eyes. A choice. Clara thought of the eviction notice, her mother's medical bills, the empty refrigerator in her tiny apartment. She thought of selling rotting flowers on street corners until winter came and she froze. She thought of all the closed doors and turned backs in impossible situations that had led her to this moment. She followed him. The mansion opened up like a labyrinth, each room more opulent than the last. Fenrir led her through halls lined with paintings that looked centuries old, past libraries that smelled of leather and time, into a conservatory where moonlight poured through glass ceiling panels. And there, in the center of the room, was a garden. But not like any garden Clara had ever seen. Flowers grew in wild profusion, roses, lilies, orchids, blooms she couldn't name all of them perfect. Their colors almost hurt to look at, too vivid, too alive. The air smelled sweet enough to drown in. "This is what I wanted you to see," Fenrir said, watching her reaction. "Life preserved. These flowers will never die. I've ensured it through means you wouldn't understand. They'll stay beautiful forever." Clara walked forward slowly, reaching out to touch a rose that looked impossibly red. The petals felt real, warm even, but something about them was wrong. They were too perfect, frozen in a moment of beauty that would never progress, never change. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered. "Because I want you to understand the choice I'm offering you." Fenrir moved to stand beside her, his presence overwhelming. "Your world is dying, Clara. You sell wilting flowers because that's all you can afford, all you can hope for. You struggle every day just to exist, and eventually you'll wither like those roses in your basket. But it doesn't have to be that way." Clara's heart hammered. "What are you suggesting?" "Stay here, with me." His voice dropped lower, intimate and dangerous. "I can give you stability, protection, a life where you never have to stand in the cold selling garbage to strangers. All you have to do is agree to serve me." "Serve you how?" Clara asked carefully. Fenrir's lips curved into something that wasn't quite approval. "Clever girl, asking the terms before accepting. I need a human attendant, someone to handle affairs during daylight, to manage connections in your world. My kind can move in sunlight, but it weakens us, makes us vulnerable. You would be my daylight eyes, my human face. In exchange, you live here, under my protection, comfortable, safe, fed." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "And if I refuse? Then you go back to your dying flowers and your dying life, and I never interfere." "But Clara..." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I don't think you want to refuse. I think you're exhausted from fighting a losing battle. I think you're tired of being invisible. I think you want someone to see you for exactly what you are and choose you anyway." His words hit too close, cutting through defenses Clara hadn't realized she'd raised. She was tired. So desperately tired. And here was this impossible man, this vampire king, offering her a way out. It terrified her. It tempted her. "I need time to think," she managed. "No." Fenrir's response was firm, but not cruel. "If I give you time, you'll talk yourself out of it. You'll convince yourself you can survive on your own, that accepting help is weakness. You'll go back to your cold apartment and your impossible situation, and I'll lose the most interesting human I've met in decades. So I'm asking you to decide now, Clara Dawson, stay or go. But decide." Clara looked around the conservatory, at the flowers that would never die, at the luxury that surrounded her, at the vampire king who watched her with an expression that might have been hope beneath the confidence. She thought about what waited for her outside those gates. Nothing good, nothing kind, nothing that cared whether she lived or died. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I want conditions." Fenrir's eyes gleamed. "Name them." "My mother's medical bills get paid. I'm not doing this for myself alone. Done. I want to keep selling flowers, not dying ones, real ones, fresh ones. I want to grow them, maybe have a shop. I don't want to just be someone's servant, even yours." Fenrir considered this, head tilted. "You'll have a greenhouse. Anything you grow you can sell. But your first priority remains serving my needs. Agreed?" Clara's mouth went dry. This was insane. She was negotiating with a vampire, agreeing to live in his mansion, to enter a world she didn't understand. But what was the alternative? Slow death in a world that had already forgotten her? "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay." Something shifted in Fenrir's expression. Satisfaction, possessiveness, something darker Clara couldn't name. "Good. Then you belong to me now." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in months. The first week in Fenrir's mansion passed in a blur of adjustment and strangeness. Clara learned quickly that vampires operated on different rules, entirely sleeping during the day, active at night, existing in a hierarchy and structure that made human bureaucracy look simple. The silver-haired woman was named Seraphine, Fenrir's second-in-command and advisor for the past 3 centuries. She treated Clara with distant politeness, clearly uncertain what to make of a human in their midst. There were others, too. Vampires who came and went through the mansion's halls, all beautiful and terrible and ancient. They looked at Clara like she was a curiosity, a pet, something that didn't quite belong but was tolerated because their king willed it. She learned not to meet their eyes directly, not to speak unless spoken to keep to the edges of rooms where the shadows were deepest. Fenrir had given her a room in the mansion's east wing, away from where he and the others spent their daylight hours. It was larger than her entire apartment had been, with a four-poster bed, a bathroom with heated floors, and windows that overlooked the gardens. Clara's few possessions looked pathetic scattered across the expensive furniture, but Seraphine had promised clothes and necessities would arrive. "You'll need to dress appropriately," the vampire had said, eyeing Clara's worn jeans and faded sweater with obvious distaste. "If you're to represent the king in daylight matters, you must look the part." Clara hadn't argued. She was still processing the fact that this was real, that she'd actually agreed to live among vampires, that her old life had ended so abruptly. She'd called her mother from a phone Seraphine provided, explaining she'd taken a live-in position as a personal assistant to a wealthy client. Her mother had been relieved, tearfully grateful, unaware that her daughter now resided with creatures of nightmare. At night, Fenrir summoned her. She found him in his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books that looked ancient enough to crumble. He sat behind a massive desk, reviewing papers with inhuman speed, his white hair catching the firelight. He looked up when she entered, gesturing for her to sit in the chair across from him. "Your first task," he said without preamble. "I own several properties throughout the city: apartments, businesses, investment holdings. During daylight, I need someone to inspect them, ensure they're being managed properly, report any issues. Seraphine has prepared a list and arranged transportation. Can you handle that?" Clara nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Yes, I can do that." "Good." Fenrir set down his papers, focusing entirely on her. The weight of his attention felt physical. "You look frightened." "I am frightened," Clara admitted. There was no point in lying to someone who could probably hear her heartbeat. "Ha, why?" "I've promised you protection. No one in this house will harm you." "Because I don't understand any of this." Clara gestured around them. "A week ago, I was selling flowers on street corners. Now I'm living with vampires and managing property for a king I didn't know existed. It's overwhelming." Fenrir leaned back in his chair, studying her with those two bright eyes. "You're handling it better than most humans would. Seraphine said you haven't screamed once, haven't tried to run. Why is that?" Clara thought about it. "Because screaming won't change anything, and I have nowhere to run to that's better than here." "Practical." He almost looked pleased. "I chose well." "Why did you choose me?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. "There must be hundreds of desperate humans in this city. Why offer this to someone selling dying flowers?" Fenrir was quiet for a long moment, the fire crackling in the silence. When he spoke, his voice carried something Clara couldn't quite identify, not quite vulnerability, but close. "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Persistence in the face of futility. You kept trying even when the flowers were rotting, even when you knew they weren't worth what you were charging. You didn't give up. That's rare, Clara. Rarer than you know. Most people surrender long before they reach your level of desperation. But you kept standing at my gates week after week, and I found myself—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Waiting for you, wondering what new dying thing you'd bring me, wanting to see that spark in your eyes when you refused to quit." Clara's chest tightened with something uncomfortable and warm. "You sound like you were lonely." Fenrir's expression shuddered immediately, walls slamming into place. "Vampire kings don't get lonely. We have courts, subjects, centuries of experience and power. Loneliness is a human weakness." But Clara had seen the flicker in his eyes before he'd hidden it. She'd struck something true, something he didn't want to acknowledge. It made him seem less like an untouchable monster, and more like something she could begin to understand. "If you say so," she said quietly, knowing better than to push. Fenrir stood abruptly. "You start your duties tomorrow. Seraphine will brief you fully. Get some rest, you'll need it." It was clearly a dismissal, but Clara didn't move immediately. "Thank you," she said instead, "for the opportunity, for helping my mother, for seeing me when no one else did." Something flickered across Fenrir's face, surprise, maybe, or something softer. "Don't thank me yet, Clara Dawson. You don't know what you've agreed to." But as Clara left the study and made her way back to her too large room, she thought maybe she was starting to understand. Fenrir wasn't just a vampire king ruling his territory with ancient power. He was something lonely and curious and drawn to broken things that kept trying, just like her. The weeks blurred into months as Clara settled into her new life. She learned the rhythm of the vampire household, quiet during the day, alive at night. She managed Fenrir's properties with careful attention, reporting discrepancies and handling issues that arose with surprising competence. Turned out that years of scraping by had taught her more about negotiation and problem-solving than any formal education could have. Fenrir seemed pleased with her work, though he rarely said so directly. Instead, he showed approval through small gestures: a greenhouse constructed behind the mansion where Clara could grow flowers, a raise in the stipend she was allowed for personal expenses, longer conversations in his study where they discussed more than just business. Those conversations became Clara's favorite part of the night. Fenrir was brilliant and strange and impossibly well-read, having lived through centuries of human history. He told her about watching cities rise and fall, about the vampire courts that existed beneath human awareness, about the delicate balance his kind maintained to stay hidden. Clara listened hungrily, asking questions that sometimes made him laugh, a rare, genuine sound that sent warmth through her chest. "You're not like other humans," he'd said one night, after she'd asked about the political structure of vampire society. "How so?" "You're not afraid of knowledge. Most humans, when confronted with our world, retreat into denial or terror. They don't want to understand, they want to forget. But you?" He'd gestured at the notebook where Clara had been taking notes. "You want to learn, to adapt. It's refreshing." "Fear seems less useful than information," Clara had replied. "If I'm going to live in your world, I should understand it." Fenrir had looked at her with something that might have been respect, or maybe something deeper that Clara was afraid to name. The other vampires gradually warmed to her presence, or at least stopped treating her like an intruder. Seraphine occasionally offered advice about dealing with Fenrir's moods. A vampire named Lucian, who managed the king's financial interests, started consulting Clara about human market trends. Even the guards acknowledged her with nods when she passed. Clara's greenhouse became her sanctuary. She grew roses and lilies and orchids, learning to coax beauty from soil and seeds. Unlike the frozen perfection of Fenrir's conservatory, these flowers lived and bloomed and eventually died, and Clara found the cycle comforting. Life didn't have to be eternal to matter. Fenrir visited her there sometimes, appearing without warning in the doorway while she worked. He never stayed long, just watched her with those intense eyes before vanishing back into the mansion. Clara wondered what he was thinking during those moments, but never asked. She was trimming rose stems one evening when he appeared behind her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold he radiated. "They're beautiful," he said quietly. Clara glanced back at him. "They're alive. That makes them beautiful. Even though they'll die? Especially because they'll die." She held up a perfect rose, its petals deep crimson. "This will only be beautiful for a week, maybe 2. Then it'll wilt and fade and rot. But right now, in this moment, it's absolutely perfect. That temporary nature makes it precious." Fenrir took the rose from her hand, careful not to let his fingers brush hers. "You think eternal things can't be precious?" Clara met his eyes. "I think eternal things forget how to be grateful." Something passed across his face, recognition maybe, or old pain. He set the rose down gently. "You see too much, Clara Dawson. Or you hide too little," she countered softly. Fenrir's lips curved into something that wasn't quite approval, but felt close. "Dangerous thing to say to a vampire king. If you wanted to hurt me, you would have done it already." "So certain?" "Yes." And Clara realized she was. Somewhere over the past months, her fear of Fenrir had transformed into something else entirely. Trust, maybe, or at least the beginnings of it. He was still dangerous, still inhuman, still capable of ending her life without effort. But he wouldn't. She knew that with the same certainty she knew her own name. Fenrir studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see the way his eyes caught and held the greenhouse's dim light, close enough that the cold rolling off him made her shiver. "You should be careful, Clara," he said, his voice low and warning. "Getting comfortable with monsters rarely ends well for humans." "Maybe I don't see a monster when I look at you." His eyes flashed with something dark and hungry. "Then you're not looking clearly enough." But he didn't move away, and neither did Clara. They stood in the greenhouse among the growing things, separated by inches and centuries and species, something unnamed building between them like pressure before a storm. The moment shattered when Seraphine appeared in the doorway, her expression urgent. "My lord, we have a situation. The Eastern Court has sent emissaries. They're demanding an audience." Fenrir's demeanor shifted instantly, the almost vulnerable creature vanishing behind the mask of the vampire king. "How many?" "3. Led by Draven himself." Clara watched Fenrir's jaw tighten, tension crackling around him like electricity. That pompous fool, what does he want? He won't say, only that it concerns territory disputes and the human. Seraphine's gaze flickered to Clara. "You." Ice shot through Clara's veins. "Me? Why would other vampires care about me?" "Because you're an anomaly," Fenrir said, his voice hard. "A human living among us, given privileges and access that violate traditional boundaries. The old families don't like change, don't like disruption to the order they've maintained for millennia. Draven would use any excuse to challenge my authority, and you—" He looked at her with something that might have been regret. "You're a very visible excuse." Clara's hands tightened on the rose stems she still held, thorns biting into her palms. "What will they do?" "Nothing," Fenrir said with absolute certainty, "because I won't allow it. But this meeting will be delicate. You should stay in your room until it's over." "No." The word came out before Clara could think better of it. "If they're here because of me, I should be present. Hiding makes it look like I'm something to be ashamed of." Seraphine inhaled sharply. "My lord, she cannot." "She makes a fair point," Fenrir interrupted, though his expression suggested he hated admitting it. "Hiding her suggests weakness or doubt. But Clara—" He turned to her fully, and there was genuine concern in his eyes. "These are not kind creatures. Draven will try to intimidate you, to prove you don't belong. Can you handle that?" Clara thought about standing in the cold, selling, rotting flowers while people walked past without seeing her. She thought about hospital waiting rooms and eviction notices, and 1,000 small humiliations poverty brought. She'd survived all of that. She could survive this. "Yes," she said firmly. "I can handle it." Fenrir held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But you stay close to me, and you speak only when I permit it. Understood?" "Understood." "Then let's go meet the Eastern Court and remind them why I'm king." The throne room, Clara hadn't even known the mansion had a throne room, was a study in intimidation. Vaulted ceilings stretched into shadow, columns carved with ancient symbols lined the walls, and at the far end sat a throne of black stone that looked like it had been hewn from a single massive rock. Fenrir sat upon it with casual authority, looking every inch the immortal king, his white hair stark against his black clothing, his eyes burning with cold fire. Clara stood to his right, slightly behind the throne as Seraphine had positioned her. Other members of Fenrir's court lined the room vampires Clara recognized, and some she didn't, all of them silent and watchful. The tension in the air felt thick enough to choke on. The Eastern Court's emissaries entered with deliberate ceremony. 3 vampires, all of them ancient and powerful, their presence making Clara's instincts scream danger. The one in front, Draven, presumably was tall even by vampire standards, with white blonde hair and eyes like chips of ice. He wore clothing that looked expensively modern, but somehow archaic, as if he couldn't quite commit to contemporary fashion. Fenrir," Draven said, his voice carrying disdain. "Still sitting on that gaudy throne, I see. Some things never change." "And you're still showing up uninvited, making demands," Fenrir replied smoothly. "Some things never improve. State your business, Draven. I have more important matters to attend to." Draven's gaze swept the room, landing on Clara with predatory focus. "Yes, I can see that. You've acquired a pet. How Quaint. Heat rushed to Clara's face, but she kept her expression neutral, her spine straight. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Clara Dawson is my daylight attendant," Fenrir said, his voice carrying an edge of warning. "She manages my human affairs with competence and discretion. Her presence here is neither quaint nor your concern." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong." Draven moved closer, his companions flanking him. "A human living among us, granted access to our world, our secrets, it violates the separation accords established 8 centuries ago. You know this, Fenrir. You helped write those accords. The accords specify that humans cannot be turned without consent, cannot be held against their will, and cannot be made aware of our existence without purpose. Clara fulfills none of those prohibitions. She serves willingly, remains human, and her knowledge serves a necessary function. I've violated nothing." Technically true, perhaps. Draven's smile was all teeth. "But you're playing games with ancient laws, creating precedents the other courts find troubling. If you can keep a human pet, what stops the younger vampires from doing the same? What stops our world from bleeding into theirs until the separation fails entirely?" Clara listened carefully, beginning to understand. This wasn't really about her at all. It was about power, about territory, about ancient vampires jockeying for position. She was just the excuse Draven needed to challenge Fenrir's authority. "My court, my territory, my decisions," Fenrir said, each word sharp as broken glass. "The Eastern Court has no jurisdiction here, unless you're formally challenging my kingship." His eyes flashed dangerously. "Which would require you to face me personally. Are you prepared to do that, Draven?" The room went absolutely silent. Even Clara, who didn't fully understand vampire politics, recognized the weight of that question. Draven's expression flickered calculation, fear, anger, before settling back into cold disdain. "I'm not here to challenge you. Yet." Draven's gaze returned to Clara. "I'm here to issue a warning. The old families are watching, Fenrir. This human of yours sets a dangerous precedent. If she remains under your protection, other courts may interpret it as weakness. They may decide your judgment has been compromised." "Let them try." Fenrir stood from his throne, and despite being surrounded by ancient vampires who could tear her apart, Clara felt safer than she had in months. "Clara Dawson is under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me personally. Spread that message to your old families, Draven. Make sure they understand exactly what it means." Draven's eyes narrowed. "You'd start a war over a human? One who'll be dead in a blink of our existence regardless?" "I'd start a war over anyone in my household who was threatened unjustly," Fenrir corrected. "Human or vampire, it makes no difference. And if the Eastern Court finds that troubling, perhaps they should examine why they're so threatened by one mortal girl." The silence stretched taut. Clara barely breathed, watching the standoff between creatures who'd existed longer than her entire lineage. Finally, Draven inclined his head in a gesture that wasn't quite respect, but wasn't open hostility either. "Your position is noted, King Fenrir. I'll relay your attachment to the other courts. But hear me clearly, this won't be the last time they question your choices. The mortal is a vulnerability, whether you acknowledge it or not. Then let them question. I've been answering challenges since before Rome fell. A few nervous old families don't concern me." Draven and his companions departed with the same calculated ceremony they'd arrived with, leaving tension humming in their wake. The moment they were gone, the other vampires began murmuring among themselves, casting glances at Clara that ranged from curious to concerned. Fenrir turned to her, his expression impossible to read. "You did well, not speaking, not reacting. That took control." "I was terrified," Clara admitted quietly. "Good. Fear keeps you cautious, but you didn't let it control you." He stepped closer, and Clara noticed something new in his gaze, possessiveness, fierce and undeniable. "I meant what I said. You're under my protection. No one touches you. No one threatens you. Understood?" The intensity of his declaration made Clara's heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Why are you doing this? If you say you're just a flower seller, I'll be very disappointed," Fenrir interrupted. "You stopped being just anything the moment you walked through my gates, Clara. Now you're mine to protect, and I don't surrender what's mine. Not to Draven, not to the old families, not to anyone. Mine. The word echoed in Clara's chest, dangerous and thrilling. She should be frightened by how much she wanted it to be true. What happens now? She asked instead. Now we prepare, Seraphine answered, stepping forward. Draven didn't come here just to issue warnings. He'll be maneuvering behind the scenes, trying to undermine Fenrir's authority. We need to shore up alliances, remind the other courts why challenging us is a terrible idea. And Clara stays close, Fenrir added, under guard when I can't be with her personally. I won't give them any opportunities. Clara wanted to argue that she didn't need constant protection, that she'd been taking care of herself for years. But the memory of Draven's cold eyes and the casual way he'd dismissed her life stopped the words. This was a world where she was fundamentally vulnerable, where ancient creatures could end her existence without effort. Pride wouldn't protect her. Fenrir would. So she nodded. Whatever you think is best. Fenrir's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being worth trusting, Clara replied. Something passed between them in that moment, recognition, connection, the acknowledgement of something that had been building since the night Clara first walked through those gates with her basket of dying flowers. Something neither of them was ready to name, but couldn't deny much longer. The weeks following Draven's visit were tense. Fenrir increased security around the mansion, posted guards that watched Clara whenever she left the grounds. He seemed perpetually on edge, his usual controlled demeanor cracking at the edges. Clara caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that mixed protectiveness with something darker, something hungry. She threw herself into her work, managing properties and growing flowers and trying not to think about how her life had become something out of a gothic romance novel. But late at night, alone in her too large room, Clara couldn't help replaying Fenrir's words. You're mine to protect. As if she were something precious, as if she mattered beyond her utility as a daylight attendant. It terrified her how much she wanted that to be true. One evening, Clara found Fenrir in the conservatory, his perfect frozen garden. He stood among the immortal flowers, looking lost in a way she'd never seen before. Something about his posture seemed almost vulnerable. They're still beautiful, Clara said softly, announcing her presence. Fenrir didn't turn. They're still dead. Preserved, yes, but not alive. I used to think eternal beauty was the highest achievement. Now I'm not so certain. Clara moved to stand beside him, careful not to touch. What changed? You. He finally looked at her, and his eyes held something raw. Your flowers in the greenhouse, they live, they die, and somehow that makes them more real than anything in this room. You were right, Clara. Eternal things forget how to be grateful. I'd forgotten so much. Forgotten what? What it feels like to want something temporary, to care about something that won't last forever. His voice dropped lower. To feel anything beyond the weight of endless centuries. Clara's breath caught. Fenrir. I'm drawn to you, he said, the admission sounding like it cost him, in ways that are dangerous and foolish and entirely inappropriate. You're human. You'll live maybe 80 years if you're fortunate, and I'll continue existing long after you're dust. Getting attached to you is the height of idiocy, and yet I can't seem to stop myself. Clara's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. You're not the only one who's drawn. Fenrir's eyes flashed. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. Clara felt brave and terrified all at once. I know this is impossible. I know you're a vampire king and I'm a girl who used to sell dying flowers. I know any relationship between us violates probably 100 ancient laws. But I can't stop thinking about you. About the way you watch me in the greenhouse. About how safe I feel when you're near, even though you could kill me without trying. About... Fenrir moved so quickly, Clara barely saw it, suddenly inches from her, his presence overwhelming. You have no idea what you're saying. What it would mean to be truly mine, the danger, the complications, the fact that I would never let you go once I claimed you. Then claim me, Clara whispered, past the point of caution. For a moment, Fenrir looked torn between desire and restraint. His hand lifted, almost touching her face, then dropped. I would be condemning you to a half-life, Always in my world, but never truly part of it. Human among vampires, constantly vulnerable, constantly at risk. Is that what you want? I want to stop feeling invisible, Clara said honestly. I want someone to see me, really see me, and choose me anyway. You already did that, Fenrir. The night you invited me inside, the night you offered me this life. You saw the girl with rotting flowers and decided she was worth keeping. Do you have any idea how that felt? Fenrir's control visibly cracked. Clara, I'm trying very hard to be honorable here. Don't be. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Be honest instead. Do you want me? His eyes burned. More than I've wanted anything in 3 centuries. Then stop fighting it. Fenrir made a sound low in his throat, frustrated and hungry and almost helpless. Then his control shattered completely. He pulled Clara against him, one hand tangling in her hair, and kissed her with all the desperate intensity he'd been suppressing for months. Clara gasped against his mouth, overwhelmed by the cold fire of his touch, the way he held her like something infinitely precious and infinitely desired. His lips were cool, his hands careful despite their strength, and Clara felt herself melting into him without reservation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least Clara was Fenrir, rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he murmured. Probably, Clara agreed. The courts will use it against me. Draven will call me compromised. The old families will see you as an even bigger threat. I know. You could die because of this, because ancient vampires decide you're a vulnerability worth eliminating. Clara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Fenrir, I was dying before you. Slowly, coldly, standing on street corners hoping someone would buy garbage flowers. At least this way, I get to live first, really live. With you, that's worth the risk. Something in his expression crumbled, the last wall falling away. You're going to destroy me, Clara Dawson. Or maybe save you, she replied softly. Fenrir kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the feel of her. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. Then you're mine. Completely. No more pretending you're just my attendant. You're my, whatever humans call it, my partner, my companion, mine. Yours, Clara confirmed, the word feeling like a promise. And I will burn down anyone who tries to take you from me. Clara believed him. More than that, she trusted him. This ancient, powerful, dangerous creature who'd seen centuries pass and somehow decided she was worth keeping. It was insane and impossible and absolutely real. They stood together in the conservatory among the frozen flowers, and for the first time since her mother got sick, since her life fell apart, since she started selling dying roses outside vampire gates, Clara felt like she'd found something permanent, something worth fighting for. The shift in their relationship didn't go unnoticed. Seraphine raised one elegant eyebrow when Fenrir announced Clara would be moving to rooms closer to his own chambers. Lucian offered congratulations that sounded slightly bemused. The other vampires watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, but none dared question their king's choices openly. Draven, unfortunately, noticed too. The message arrived 3 weeks after Clara and Fenrir acknowledged what had been building between them. A formal letter, delivered by courier, demanding Fenrir's presence at a gathering of the regional courts. The language was diplomatic, but the underlying threat was clear: explain yourself or face consequences. They're going to demand you give me up, Clara said, reading over Fenrir's shoulder in his study. They can demand whatever they like. I'm not surrendering you. This could start a war. Then we'll fight a war. Fenrir said it so casually, as if armed conflict between immortal factions was a minor inconvenience. Clara circled the desk to face him. I don't want to be the reason your world tears itself apart. Fenrir pulled her into his lap, holding her close. This casual intimacy still felt new and thrilling, being allowed to touch him freely, to feel the cool strength of him against her warmth. The courts have been looking for reasons to challenge me for decades. You're not the cause, Clara. You're the excuse. If it wasn't you, it would be something else: territory disputes, feeding rights, ancient grudges. This is just politics dressed up as moral concern. But I make it easier for them. You make my existence bearable, Fenrir countered. That's more important than political convenience. Clara rested her head against his shoulder. breathing in his scent, frost and old books and something uniquely him. What happens at this gathering? Posturing. Mostly. The old families will question my judgment. Draven will make speeches about tradition and the separation accords. I'll remind them all why challenging me directly is a bad idea, standard vampire court nonsense. And if they don't accept that? Fenrir's arms tightened around her. Then things get complicated. But Clara, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. I have lived for over 300 years. I have fought wars, survived plagues, watched empires rise and fall. I have never once found something worth keeping the way I want to keep you. So let the courts object. Let Draven scheme. Let the old families clutch their pearls about tradition. I'm not giving you up. The fierce certainty in his voice made Clara's chest ache. You might not have a choice. If enough courts unite against you, they won't. Most of them are too busy with their own power plays to genuinely care about my romantic life. Draven is loud, but he doesn't have the support he thinks he does. Trust me, Clara, I've been navigating vampire politics since before your great-great-grandparents were born. I know what I'm doing. Clara wanted to believe him, but the memory of Draven's cold eyes and casual threats kept her awake after Fenrir left for his daylight rest. She paced her new rooms, larger, more luxurious, connected to Fenrir's chambers through a private door, trying to think of solutions. The problem was that Clara brought nothing to this relationship but vulnerability. She couldn't fight ancient vampires. She couldn't navigate immortal politics. She was just a human who'd gotten impossibly lucky, and now that luck was running out. Fenrir would protect her because he was honorable and possessive, and possibly falling in love with her. But protection wasn't partnership. Clara wanted to help, not just be something worth defending. She was still thinking when Seraphine appeared in her doorway, looking uncommonly serious. "We need to talk," the vampire said, "about what's coming." Clara gestured her inside. Fenrir says it's just political posturing. Fenrir is optimistic because he's powerful enough to ignore most threats. Seraphine sat with inhuman grace, folding her hands in her lap. But you should understand the reality. If the courts decide you're too dangerous a precedent, they have options beyond direct confrontation. Ice shot through Clara's veins. What kind of options? Assassination, for one. Hiring humans to do it so vampire laws aren't technically violated. Or they could manipulate your mortal life, frame you for crimes, destroy your reputation, make it impossible for you to function in human society so that keeping you becomes more trouble than it's worth for Fenrir. Clara struggled for words. That's monstrous. Seraphine's smile held no humor. We are monsters, dear. That's rather the point. And the old families are particularly good at creative cruelty. They've had centuries to perfect it. Clara's hands clenched into fists. So what do I do? Hide forever? Hope they get bored? No, you become indispensable. Seraphine leaned forward, her ancient eyes intense. Right now, you're a curiosity, a human pet that amuses the king. But if you were essential to his power, if losing you meant genuine strategic damage, the courts would have to factor that into their calculations. How do I become essential? By doing what you already do, but publicly. Fenrir's daylight holdings have thrived since you took them over. His investments in the human world have increased in value. You have a skill for navigating mortal bureaucracy that vampires struggle with, even the old ones. Make that visible. Make the courts see that you're not just a romantic indulgence, you're a strategic asset. Clara thought about it. You're saying I need to prove my worth to a bunch of ancient vampires who already think I shouldn't exist. I'm saying you need to prove you're worth the trouble of keeping alive. Seraphine stood, smoothing her dress. The gathering is in 2 weeks. Between now and then, make yourself essential. Show them that killing you would damage Fenrir's power, not just his heart. Make them think twice about the cost. After Seraphine left, Clara sat in silence for a long time. Then she pulled out her laptop and started working. If she was going to survive vampire politics, she needed to be more than Fenrir's love interest. She needed to be useful. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara worked herself to exhaustion. She cataloged every property Fenrir owned, every investment, every business interest. She streamlined operations, identified inefficiencies, proposed expansions into markets the vampires hadn't considered because they required daylight coordination. She reached out to human contacts lawyers, accountants, real estate agents, building a network that could only function through her mortal connections. She presented her findings to Fenrir one evening, spreading documents across his desk with nervous energy. Your entertainment holdings could expand into streaming services. Vampires are perfectly positioned to create content during night hours. Your real estate portfolio should include more residential properties. Human tenants provide steady income and ears in communities you don't have access to. And your financial investments are too conservative. With my human credentials, I could open accounts and opportunities that are closed to non-citizens with mysterious backgrounds. Fenrir studied the documents with growing surprise. This is extensive. This is me being indispensable, Clara said firmly. Seraphine told me I needed to prove my worth beyond being your girlfriend, so I'm proving it. I'm not just a human you're keeping around because you like me. I'm a strategic advantage, and if the courts kill me, you lose all of this. Something shifted in Fenrir's expression, surprise giving way to pride. You've been planning this. I've been surviving. That's what I do. Remember? I sold dying flowers and made rent somehow. This is just a different kind of survival. Clara met his eyes. I can't fight ancient vampires, Fenrir. I can't even argue with them in their own language, but I can make myself valuable enough that killing me costs more than tolerating me. That's the only weapon I have. Fenrir stood slowly, moving around the desk to cup her face in his cool hands. You brilliant, stubborn, impossible creature. Do you have any idea how rare you are? A desperate human with good survival instincts? A human who sees an impossible situation and finds a way through anyway. He kissed her softly. I was prepared to protect you through force alone. But this showing the courts that you are an asset beyond emotional attachment, this might actually work. Might? Vampire politics are never certain, but you've given me better leverage than I had before, and you did it yourself, without waiting for me to solve everything. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. I think I'm falling in love with you, Clara Dawson. Clara's heart stuttered. You think? I've never been in love before. I'm not entirely certain what it feels like, but if it's this constant need to have you near, this pride in your accomplishments, this absolute certainty that I would destroy anyone who harmed you, then yes, I'm in love with you. Clara wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. I'm definitely in love with you, just so that's clear. She felt him smile against her hair. Noted. Now come with me. If we're presenting you as a strategic asset, you need to look the part. The gathering is in 4 days, and I want the courts to see exactly how valuable you are. The gathering took place in a location Clara would never have imagined beneath the city, in tunnels that predated modern construction. Fenrir explained that vampires had built their courts underground centuries ago, creating spaces where they could gather without sunlight threatening them. The main chamber was vast, carved from living rock, lit by thousands of candles that cast dancing shadows across ancient stone. Vampires filled the space, more than Clara had ever seen in one place. They represented different courts, different territories, all of them ancient and powerful, and watching her with predatory interest. Clara wore a dress Seraphine had chosen elegant and expensive, but professional, marking her as more than ornamental. She stayed close to Fenrir, who moved through the crowd with absolute authority, greeting rivals and allies with equal coolness. Draven appeared like a shadow, his cold eyes fixed on Clara with obvious disdain. Fenrir, I see you brought your pet. How bold. I brought my daylight coordinator, Fenrir corrected smoothly, who has increased my holdings by 30% in the past year. Some of us believe in strategic assets beyond intimidation, Draven. Murmurs rippled through the nearby vampires. Clara kept her expression neutral, letting her presence speak for itself. She'd dressed carefully, carried herself with confidence, projected competence instead of fear. First impressions mattered, even among immortals. The gathering was called to order by an ancient vampire named Mordecai, who apparently served as neutral arbiter for these affairs. He was even paler than the others, his white hair so long it brushed the floor, his eyes milky with age. When he spoke, everyone listened. "We gather to address concerns raised by the Eastern Court regarding King Fenrir's arrangement with a human." Mordecai's gaze found Clara, assessing. "The mortal in question stands before us. What say you, Draven of the East? State your grievance clearly." Draven stepped forward with theatrical grace. "My grievance is simple, honored elder. Fenrir Nox keeps a human in his household, grants her access to our secrets, treats her as something between servant and companion. This violates the spirit of the separation accords, creates dangerous precedent, and suggests his judgment has been compromised by mortal attachment." The crowd murmured agreement, some enthusiastic, some reluctant. Clara's hands wanted to shake, but she kept them steady. This was the moment Seraphine had prepared her for. "The human brings strategic value," Fenrir said before Mordecai could respond. "She manages my daylight affairs with exceptional skill, navigating mortal bureaucracy and business in ways vampires cannot. My holdings have increased significantly under her management. This isn't sentiment, it's strategic necessity." "Let the mortal speak for herself," Mordecai said unexpectedly. "If she's truly an asset and not a pet, she should be capable of defending her own existence." Every vampire in the chamber turned to stare at Clara. The weight of their attention felt crushing dozens of predators evaluating prey. Clara swallowed hard, stepped forward, and somehow found her voice. "My name is Clara Dawson. Before I came to serve King Fenrir, I was nobody, a street vendor selling dying flowers, barely surviving. He offered me an opportunity, and I took it. Since then, I've managed over 40 properties, coordinated investments in markets vampires can't access directly, and built networks in the human world that provide intelligence and opportunity. I understand I'm an anomaly. I understand my presence makes you uncomfortable. But I'm not here because of sentiment alone. I'm here because I make King Fenrir's power stronger, not weaker, and killing me would cost him advantages none of your courts have." The silence that followed felt eternal. Clara couldn't read the vampire's expressions, too alien, too old, too far beyond human comprehension. But she'd said her piece. Now it was up to them. "Bold words," Mordecai said finally, "and verifiable claims, I assume." "Entirely verifiable," Fenrir confirmed. "I can provide documentation, financial records, testimony from business partners, whatever proof you require." Draven stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Proof of competence doesn't address the fundamental issue. She's mortal. She knows our secrets. What happens when she leaves Fenrir's service? When she decides to write a book or tell authorities or simply slip up? The separation exists for a reason. Mortals can't be trusted with knowledge of our existence." "I'm never leaving," Clara said before she could stop herself. "Not by choice. And King Fenrir has made it clear that if I ever betray his trust, the consequences would be terminal. I'm not a threat to your secrets. I'm invested in protecting them because my life depends on it." "A compelling argument based entirely on fear," Mordecai observed. "What happens if you cease to be afraid? If you find something you value more than your own survival?" Clara thought of her mother, healthy now thanks to Fenrir's money. She thought of the greenhouse, the flowers she grew, the life she'd built from nothing. She thought of Fenrir himself, the vampire king who'd seen value in a girl selling rotting roses. "I already have something I value more than survival," she said quietly. "I have purpose. I have meaningful work. I have someone who sees me as more than disposable. You're asking what happens if I betray all that. The answer is nothing, because I won't. Not for money, not for fame, not for anything. This is my world now. I chose it. And I'll protect it as fiercely as any vampire here protects their territory." More silence. Then, unexpectedly, a vampire Clara didn't recognize began to clap slowly. Others joined in, not universal approval, but acknowledgement. Clara had spoken well. She'd defended herself without begging, without weakness. Mordecai raised one ancient hand, silencing the gathering. "The Eastern Court has raised concerns, and they have been answered. The mortal demonstrates value and discretion. King Fenrir has acted within the bounds of the accords, if perhaps stretching their intent, unless someone wishes to challenge his kingship directly." His gaze swept the crowd, landing meaningfully on Draven. This matter is settled. Draven's expression twisted with frustration. This sets a dangerous precedent. Precedent is how law evolves, Mordecai interrupted. You've raised your concerns, Draven. They've been heard and adjudicated. If you wish to challenge King Fenrir personally, do so now. Otherwise, accept the ruling and move on. The chamber held its breath. Clara watched Draven calculate, saw the moment he decided direct confrontation wasn't worth the risk. Fenrir was too powerful, too entrenched, and Clara had just proven she wasn't the easy target Draven had hoped for. I accept the ruling, Draven said finally, each word dripping with resentment. For now. Then this gathering is concluded. Mordecai gestured dismissal, and the vampires began dispersing into conversations and political clusters. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. Fenrir's hand caught her elbow, steadying her. You did perfectly, he murmured. Absolutely perfectly. I thought I was going to pass out. You didn't show it. You stood before the courts and defended yourself like you belonged here. I've never been more proud. Clara looked up at him, seeing genuine admiration in his ancient eyes. Is it really over? This particular challenge is over. Draven will keep scheming. The old families will keep grumbling, but they can't use you as easy leverage anymore. You proved you're more than a liability. Fenrir pulled her close, uncaring who saw. You proved you're mine and that I'm not giving you up. Seraphine appeared beside them, her expression carefully neutral. We should leave before Draven tries something stupid. He doesn't accept defeat gracefully. They made their way out of the underground chamber, back through tunnels that led to the modern city above. Clara's heart was still racing, adrenaline making her hands shake now that the performance was over. She'd faced down ancient vampires, and somehow survived. More than survived, she'd won. The night air felt impossibly sweet when they emerged into it. Fenrir's car waited nearby, and they climbed inside, leaving the vampire politics behind for now. That was terrifying, Clara said once they were moving. That was necessary, Fenrir corrected, and you handled it brilliantly. Half those vampires probably expected you to break down crying or beg for mercy. Instead, you looked them in the eye and demanded respect. It was magnificent. Clara leaned against him, exhaustion hitting hard. What happens now? Now we go home. You rest. I deal with the political fallout, which will be minimal thanks to your performance. And we continue building the life we've started. Fenrir pressed a kiss to her temple. Together. Because you're mine, and I'm yours, and the courts can't do anything about it. It sounded too good to be true. But looking up at Fenrir's face, seeing the certainty there, Clara let herself believe it. She'd survived poverty, illness, loss, and now vampire politics. Maybe she'd earned a little happiness. The months that followed were unexpectedly peaceful. The courts, having officially accepted Clara's presence, largely left them alone. Draven made a few more attempts to stir trouble, but without support from the other families, his challenges fell flat. Clara continued managing Fenrir's daylight affairs, her network of human contacts growing more valuable with each passing week. She proved over and over that she was an asset worth protecting. But more than that, she and Fenrir grew closer in ways that transcended utility. They spent evenings in the greenhouse, Fenrir watching Clara tend her flowers with an expression of contentment that Seraphine claimed she'd never seen before. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, Clara's childhood, Fenrir's centuries of experience, their hopes for a future that was wildly uncertain but felt worth fighting for. Fenrir was careful with her always, aware of his strength and her fragility, but he was also passionate in ways Clara hadn't expected from someone so ancient. He touched her like she was precious, kissed her like she was oxygen, looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing he'd encountered in 300 years. It was intoxicating and terrifying and absolutely real. I never thought I'd feel this, Fenrir admitted one night, holding Clara in his chambers while moonlight poured through the windows. Connection, need, love. I'd existed so long thinking those were mortal weaknesses. And now? Clara asked, tracing patterns on his chest through his shirt. Now I think maybe mortals understand something we've forgotten. That temporary things are worth cherishing because they're temporary. That love matters more because it can be lost. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. You've taught me that, Clara. You and your wilting flowers. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. They weren't wilting because I wanted them to be. I just couldn't afford better. I know, but you sold them anyway, refused to give up even when they were rotting. That stubborn persistence drew me to you first. Everything else, he gestured between them. This developed because you're remarkable, not because you needed saving. I did need saving, though. You gave me a life when I had nothing. And you gave me purpose when I had everything but meaning. Fenrir pulled her closer. Seems like a fair trade, Clara laughed softly. A vampire king falling in love with a street vendor. It sounds like a fairy tale. Fairy tales usually end badly for mortals involved with monsters. Good thing this isn't a fairy tale, then. Clara looked up at him seriously. This is real. Complicated and dangerous and politically messy, but real. I love you, Fenrir. Not because you saved me, and not because I'm afraid of you. I love you because you saw me when I was invisible, because you're brilliant and protective, and surprisingly gentle for an ancient predator, because you make me want to be brave enough to deserve you. Fenrir's expression cracked with something raw. You deserve far better than me. You deserve a mortal life, with sunlight and human companions and the certainty of growing old. Instead, you're trapped in my world, constantly at risk, loving something that will outlive you by centuries. I'm not trapped, Clara corrected firmly. I chose this. I choose it every day. Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. Stubborn, Fenrir murmured, but there was affection in his voice. You love it. I love you. The stubbornness is just part of the package. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the outside world temporarily forgotten. Clara knew this peace wouldn't last forever. It never did. There would be more challenges, more courts questioning Fenrir's choices, more vampires who saw her as a weakness to exploit. But for now, she had this: safety, love, purpose. It was more than she'd ever hoped for, standing outside his gates with dying flowers and empty pockets. The crisis came 6 months later, from a direction none of them expected. Clara's mother got sick again, different illness, same desperation. The treatments had worked before, but the cancer had returned with a vengeance, and the doctors were talking about months instead of years. Clara got the call during daylight, while Fenrir slept, and felt her world tilt sideways. She made arrangements immediately, ensuring her mother had the best care money could buy. Fenrir's resources made that possible, and Clara used them without hesitation. But money couldn't cure everything, and the doctor's careful pessimism made it clear this time might be different. When Fenrir woke that evening, he found Clara in the greenhouse staring at her flowers without really seeing them. "Tell me," he said simply, and Clara broke. She explained through tears her mother, the cancer, the helplessness of watching someone you love fade away. Fenrir held her through it, letting her cry against his chest, offering comfort without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. "I need to be with her," Clara said when she could speak again, "for however long she has. I can still manage your affairs, but I need—" "Go," Fenrir interrupted gently. "Be with your mother. Everything else can wait. The courts might see it as weakness, me leaving for mortal concerns. Let them. Your mother is dying, Clara. Nothing matters more than that." He cupped her face, wiping tears away with his thumbs. "Family is family, whether mortal or vampire. I'll handle the courts. You handle what you need to handle." Clara nodded, grateful beyond words. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just come back when you're ready. I'll be here." Clara spent the next weeks at her mother's bedside, watching a strong woman fade into something fragile. Her mother was grateful for the care, curious about Clara's mysterious employer, proud of how her daughter had landed on her feet. She never knew she was being kept alive by vampire money, never suspected her daughter lived among monsters. "You look happy," her mother said one afternoon, her voice weak but genuine. "Tired but happy, like you've found something worth keeping." "I have," Clara admitted. "Someone, actually. He's complicated, but good." "Then hold on to him. Life's too short to waste on anything less than complicated and good." Clara held her mother's hand, feeling it grow cooler despite the hospital's warmth. "I'm scared, Mom." "Of what?" "Losing you. Losing him. Losing this life I've built that feels too good to be real." Her mother squeezed weakly. Everything good feels too good to be real at first. That doesn't make it less real. You fought so hard to survive, Clara. Don't forget to actually live now that you can. It was the last meaningful conversation they had. 3 days later, Clara's mother passed peacefully in her sleep, with Clara holding her hand. The grief was crushing, absolute, the kind of loss that redefines existence. But underneath it, Clara felt something else, too. Gratitude that her mother's last months had been comfortable, that the medical bills hadn't destroyed them both, that Fenrir's intervention had given them time that poverty would have stolen. She returned to the mansion a week after the funeral, exhausted and hollowed out. Fenrir met her at the door, pulling her into his arms without words. He didn't offer platitudes or try to minimize her pain. He just held her while she broke apart and stayed with her while she slowly reassembled. "I keep thinking about what she said," Clara murmured later, lying in Fenrir's bed with him curled protectively around her. "About actually living instead of just surviving." Wise woman. "I've spent so long fighting to exist that I forgot to think about what I wanted beyond survival. But I know now." Clara turned to face him. "I want this. You. This life. This strange, beautiful, impossible thing we've built. I want to grow flowers and manage your empire and argue with ancient vampires who think I don't belong. I want all of it, for however long I have." Fenrir's expression held such tenderness it made Clara's chest ache. "You have it. For as long as you want it, you have it. I'm not letting you go. Even though I'm mortal, even though I'll age and die and you'll keep existing. Especially because of that." He touched her face gently. "I've had centuries, Clara. Endless years of existence without meaning. If I get 30 or 40 or 50 years with you, years where I feel alive instead of just immortal, that's worth more than another 1,000 years of empty eternity." Clara kissed him, pouring grief and love and gratitude into the gesture. Fenrir responded with careful intensity, mindful of her fragility even in passion. They made love slowly, tenderly, a reminder that they were both alive and together and real despite everything threatening to tear them apart. Afterwards, Clara lay in the darkness, listening to Fenrir's unnecessary breathing, feeling the cool weight of him against her warmth. "I want to stay human," she said quietly. Fenrir went still. "What?" "I know vampire legends talk about making humans immortal. I need you to know I don't want that. This life, this temporary human life, it's what makes everything precious. If I became immortal, I'd lose that. I'd lose what made you fall in love with me in the first place." Fenrir was silent for a long moment. Then, "I wasn't going to offer. Turning requires consent and desire, and I've seen too many humans become vampires out of fear rather than genuine want. They almost always regret it. But Clara," his voice roughened, "that means I'll lose you, eventually, inevitably." "Yes, but you'll have had me, fully, for whatever time we get. Isn't that better than centuries of me existing as something I never wanted to be?" Fenrir pulled her impossibly closer. "You're asking me to accept loving something I know I'll lose." "Isn't that what love is?" Clara countered gently. "Choosing to care even though loss is inevitable. You taught me that with your frozen conservatory and my dying flowers. The temporary things matter most because they don't last. I hate that you're right. I know, but I am right. We both know it." Fenrir pressed his face into her hair, and Clara felt something that might have been tears, though vampires supposedly didn't cry. "Then I'll love you, mortal. I'll protect you, mortal. And when you're gone, I'll remember every moment of what it felt like to be alive because of you." It was a promise and a goodbye, and a declaration of love all at once. Clara held him through it, this ancient, powerful creature who'd learned to feel again because of a girl selling rotting flowers. They'd found something impossible and precious, and they'd keep it for as long as they could. It would hurt when it ended. Hurt Fenrir most of all, but the pain would be worth it. The love would be worth it. Everything worth having always was. The years that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. She grew older gracefully, her 20s giving way to 30s, laugh lines appearing at her eyes. Fenrir remained unchanging, beautiful and terrible, and entirely hers. They navigated the challenges together, occasional court politics, the strangeness of their mismatched relationship, the knowledge that their time was limited. Clara's flower business grew beyond the greenhouse, expanding into a proper shop that became somewhat legendary in the city. People came from across the region for her roses, not knowing they were grown on vampire-owned land by a woman who'd once sold dying blooms out of desperation. She hired employees, humans who had no idea about the supernatural world but recognized Clara's talent. The shop thrived. Fenrir's holdings continued to expand under Clara's daylight management. She'd become indispensable not just to him but to his entire court. Even Seraphine admitted grudging respect for the mortal who'd carved out space in their immortal world through sheer competence and stubbornness. Draven made one last attempt to challenge Fenrir's authority when Clara turned 35. He appeared at the mansion unannounced, his expression triumphant. "She's aging," he announced, as if this were revelation. "Your mortal pet is growing old, Fenrir. How long before she becomes a burden instead of an asset? How long before you tire of watching her decay?" Clara, who'd been present for the confrontation, stepped forward before Fenrir could respond. She was older now, more confident, entirely unintimidated by ancient vampires who'd once terrified her. "I'm aging, yes," she said calmly. "That's what mortals do. But I'm also more effective at my work than I was at 25. I have more connections, more experience, more understanding of how to navigate both our worlds. Age isn't decay, Draven, it's growth. Something you'd understand if you weren't stuck in eternal stagnation." Draven's eyes flashed with anger. "Insolent." "Accurate," Fenrir interrupted, his voice carrying lethal warning. "Clara is right. She's become more valuable with time, not less. And even if she were nothing but a burden, I'd keep her because I love her. That's not weakness, Draven. That's having something worth protecting beyond power and politics. You should try it sometime." Draven left in cold fury, and the courts never seriously challenged Fenrir's relationship with Clara again. They'd proven themselves too solid, too functional, too genuinely beneficial to both parties. The impossible romance had become simply fact, the vampire king and his mortal companion ruling their territory with combined strength. On Clara's 40th birthday, Fenrir gave her a gift that made her cry. It was a painting of the night they'd met, or rather, an artist's interpretation based on Fenrir's memories. Clara standing outside the gates with her basket of wilting flowers, looking cold and desperate and stubbornly hopeful. The mansion looming behind the iron bars, mysterious and forbidding. "This is where it started," Fenrir said softly. "You, refusing to quit. Me, curious about the girl who kept bringing death to my door. I didn't know then that you'd become everything." Clara studied the painting through tears. "I look so young." "You were young. You're still young to me. I've watched centuries pass. But Clara," he turned her to face him, "I don't love you less because you're aging. I love you more because every year is proof you chose this, chose me, despite everything." "Always," Clara promised, "for however long I have." They both knew that time was growing shorter. Clara's body, while healthy, showed the inevitable marks of mortality. Gray threads appeared in her dark hair. Her joints ached sometimes in the morning. She tired more easily than she once had, but her mind stayed sharp, her determination undiminished, her love for Fenrir deeper than ever. On her 45th birthday, Clara made a decision. She called Fenrir to the greenhouse, their place, where everything important between them seemed to happen, and took his cool hands in her warm ones. "I want to talk about what happens after," she said quietly. Fenrir's expression shuddered. "Clara." "No, listen, I'm not dying tomorrow, but we both know I'm past halfway, and I need you to promise me something." She waited until his ancient eyes met hers. "When I'm gone, I need you to keep living, not just existing living. Find purpose beyond me. Maybe help other desperate humans, or invest in mortal causes, or just remember that temporary things matter. Don't let losing me turn you back into the immortal who felt nothing, please." Fenrir looked stricken. "You're asking me to be okay with losing you." "I'm asking you to survive it. There's a difference." Clara squeezed his hands. You taught me that real life, means accepting loss and loving anyway. I need you to remember that lesson after I'm gone. I don't want to lose you. I know, but you will, eventually. And I need to know that this us won't destroy you, that I gave you something that lasts beyond my mortal years. Fenrir pulled her against him, holding her like she might disappear. When he spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. You gave me everything, Clara. Purpose, joy, love, the memory of what it feels like to be alive instead of just immortal. I'll carry that forever. I promise. Clara let herself cry against his chest, grief for the future, mixing with gratitude for the present. They had time, still years, hopefully. But this conversation needed to happen. This promise needed to be made, because Clara loved Fenrir too much to let her inevitable death break him beyond repair. They stayed in the greenhouse until dawn approached, surrounded by living flowers that would bloom and fade and bloom again. It felt appropriate this space had witnessed their growth together, had seen Clara transform from desperate seller of dying roses to confident partner of a vampire king. Whatever happened next, they'd built something beautiful, something that would matter long after Clara's brief mortal span ended. And that, Clara thought, was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The years continued their inevitable march. Clara reached 50, then 55, her hair more silver than brown now, her face marked with the lines of a life well lived. She cut back on the physical demands of managing Fenrir's properties, training younger assistants to handle the day-to-day while she focused on strategy and relationships. The flower shop thrived under her management team, her legacy growing roots that would outlast her. Fenrir remained unchanged, beautiful and terrible and entirely devoted. He treated Clara's aging with careful tenderness, adjusting their life to accommodate her changing needs without making it feel like concession. Heated blankets appeared in their chambers when her joints ached, steps acquired railings, schedules adjusted to honor her need for more rest. But he never treated her as diminished. Clara was still his partner, his advisor, his love. The respect between them had only deepened with time, built on decades of shared challenges and mutual support. The vampire courts regarded them as a unit, now queen and king in all but official title, their relationship too established to question. On Clara's 60th birthday, Fenrir threw her a party that blended both their worlds. Vampires mingled with Clara's human friends and employees, the supernatural carefully hidden but present nonetheless. It was a strange, wonderful celebration of a life that had started with dying flowers and desperate hope. Seraphine approached Clara during the festivities, her ancient eyes thoughtful. "You've aged well," she said without preamble. "Not just physically, though you've done that too, but you've grown into this life, made it yours instead of just surviving in it." Clara smiled. "Coming from you, that means something." "I doubted you at first," Seraphine admitted. "I thought you were a phase, something Fenrir would tire of once the novelty faded. But you've proven yourself over and over. You're not just his consort, Clara. You're his equal in the ways that matter. The court respects that. I respect that." "Thank you," Clara said quietly. "That means more than you know." Seraphine nodded, then hesitated. "He's going to break when you're gone. You know that, yes?" "I know. But he'll survive it. He promised me he would." Promises and reality are different things, loving something mortal. Seraphine glanced across the room at Fenrir, who was engaged in conversation with Lucian. "It's the bravest thing I've seen any vampire do in my 3 centuries. Or the most foolish. Perhaps both." "Love usually is," Clara agreed. She made it to 65 in good health, then 67. Her body slowed further, but her mind stayed sharp, her humor intact, her love for Fenrir unwavering. They spent evenings talking for hours like they always had, his cool hand in her warm one, decades of memories between them. One night, Clara woke in their chambers with pain radiating through her chest. She knew immediately what it was, her body finally, inevitably failing. Fenrir woke the moment her heartbeat changed, ancient senses recognizing crisis. "Clara." "It's time," she managed, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. "Call the doctors if you want, but we both know what this is." Fenrir's expression cracked with raw grief. "No, not yet. You're not." "I am," Clara interrupted gently. She touched his face with trembling fingers. "It's okay. I'm not afraid." "I am." His voice broke. "I'm terrified." "I know, but you'll be okay. Remember your promise." Fenrir gathered her into his arms as carefully as he had the very first time, decades ago in the conservatory. Clara felt herself weakening, her heartbeat irregular, her breath shallow. But she also felt loved absolutely, completely loved. It was enough. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for teaching me that I was worth more than dying flowers in desperation." "Thank you," Fenrir said through tears that vampires supposedly couldn't cry, "for teaching me to feel again, for loving something immortal despite its impossibility, for being exactly who you were when I needed you most." Clara smiled, even as darkness crept at the edges of her vision. "Grow something living in the conservatory. Let it bloom and die and bloom again. Remember that temporary things matter most." "I will, I promise. I love you, Fenrir Nox. I love you, Clara Dawson, forever." Clara's eyes closed for the last time, her final breath a soft sigh. Fenrir held her as her heartbeat stopped, as the warmth faded from her body, as the mortal woman who'd changed his immortal existence slipped away into whatever waited beyond. He stayed with her until dawn, threatened, until Seraphine gently insisted he needed to rest. The funeral was held during daylight, preventing most vampires from attending, but Clara's human friends and employees filled the space with flowers from her shop roses and lilies and orchids, all of them alive and beautiful and temporary. Fenrir stood at the edge of the cemetery after sunset, looking at the fresh grave marked with Clara's name and dates that spanned such a brief time by vampire standards. 67 years, nothing, everything. "She made me promise to keep living," he said to Seraphine, who'd accompanied him, "not just existing, living. Will you keep that promise?" Fenrir thought of Clara standing outside his gates with dying flowers, refusing to quit. He thought of her facing down ancient vampires with courage she didn't know she possessed. He thought of decades of conversations and laughter and love that had made his immortal existence finally mean something. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'll keep it. For her." True to his word, Fenrir transformed his life in Clara's memory. He opened the mansion's grounds to humans in need not as servants, but as those requiring genuine help. He used his vast resources to support mortal causes Clara had cared about. He funded hospitals and shelters and programs that gave desperate people the chances Clara had needed so desperately. And in his conservatory, he let the frozen flowers die. He replaced them with living gardens that bloomed and faded and bloomed again, tended by employees who understood their temporary beauty was the point. Fenrir learned to find peace in that cycle, life and death and renewal, the pattern Clara had tried to teach him from the beginning. Years passed, decades, but Fenrir never forgot the mortal woman who'd sold wilting flowers outside his gates and somehow taught an ancient vampire how to feel again. Her lessons about love, about choosing to care despite inevitable loss, about the value of temporary precious things, stayed with him through all the centuries that followed. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Fenrir would visit Clara's grave and tell her about the lives they'd saved together, the changes her influence had wrought, the legacy of the girl who'd refused to stop trying even when she was selling garbage to survive. "You were right," he'd say softly. "Temporary things matter most. You mattered most, and I'll carry that forward until my own end comes, whenever that may be." It wasn't the ending Clara would have chosen. She'd have preferred immortality together, endless years instead of limited decades. But it was honest. It was real. And in its way, it was happy because they'd loved completely while they had the chance, and that love continued to matter long after Clara's brief mortal life had ended. The Vampire King and the Flower Seller had found something impossible, protected it fiercely, and built a legacy that transcended death itself. In the end, that was more than most immortals ever achieved. It was enough. It was everything.